Detectives and police officers, what case did you not care to find the answer to? Why? I was a corrections officer and we work with the police on an almost daily basis. We'd get to chatting, and I found, in my experience, cops hated car chases, they hated domestic disputes, but most of all, they hated people ending it all. I don't think I know a cop who doesn't have that kind of story where they can actually tell the whole thing. Being a cop and a prison CEO puts you into contact with some of the lowest forms of human life, people for whom you couldn't shed a tear, but it's the innocent people, the victims of car accidents ending it all, and families of victims that really bother us. As a CEO, I had a little old lady who'd take a 4-hour bus ride to come to the prison to speak with her nephew. He was a real piece of crap, but she'd knit him sweaters, show him the sweaters, and say, "I'll put this in the drawer for when you get out." She'd bring him food, which he could eat, and they'd talk, and one of the CEOs would drive her back to the bus station. She broke my heart. It's always the people left behind or those suffering that really get to us. Yeah, so basically, cops are just like cats. They hate chases that don't end with a satisfying catch, and they're deeply emotionally scarred by witnessing anything remotely sad. Makes sense. Story 2. I'm a 34-year-old who's battled depression and self destructive thoughts, and I still do. I have 2 kids, a wife, a great job, and I'm healthy, but I have a hard time overcoming my mental issues. I've wanted to end my own life for a long time. About 2 years ago, my dad ended himself. He didn't leave a note or call anyone. He just checked out. He never even got to meet his youngest grandson, who was born a week after he passed away. After dealing with the aftermath of his passing, seeing the toll it took on my brother, my grandmother, and my uncles, I've decided that I can't place that burden on my family, no matter how bad it gets. I've committed to doing everything in my power to prevent myself from going through with it. Medication, therapy, counseling, self-improvement exercises. I just can't bear the thought of my family dealing with the pain that I experience. Keep focused and remember that somebody somewhere needs you to be alive whether you realize it or not. Story 3. I live near the headquarters of the FBI, and I know some people have seen some crap. Shout out to the people who work with Interpol and work on international cases like in parts of the Innocence Lost Project or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration of Children and Families. Often they find clear evidence of mistreatment, but they can't do anything about it because it's either not illegal in some crap hole country or it's not enforced. Check out International Justice Mission for that. I still remember a story from an ACF guy about how U.S. corporate charities would go to India and find children forced to work, and instead of reporting it, they just distribute protections and move along. It must be horrible not being able to do anything about this. Story 4. I was a victim of mistreatment. My story is on Reddit somewhere. I was a teenager when it happened, 16, but I'll never move on from it. I remember that day like it was just yesterday. My adoptive dad was screaming at me, saying the same things he did every day. "I hate you. You are worthless. You are worth less than the crap on my shoe." And at one point, he told me to just leave. So I did. I had lived there only a few months, but I knew how to get to the school. I knew that a police officer lived near the school. I walked to that school, looking over my back with every step. I found a feather on the ground and picked it up. For some reason, that feather meant everything to me. I made it to the officer's house and knocked on the door. A woman answered. I asked if Officer Tom was there. She was hesitant to get him, but I insisted. When he came to the door, I lost all composure and started bawling my eyes out. I told him everything. I told him about the hurtful words that they would say. I told him about all the cruelty. I told him everything. He brought me to the local social worker's house. I sat in the front seat, and it was so hot outside, it felt like it was 100 degrees, which was unusual for the area I lived in North Dakota. The social worker came out, and we went back to the house I was living in. The social worker and Officer Tom told my adoptive father and the witch that I would not be coming back. The social worker asked my 5-year-old sister if she was going to miss me. "That's not my sister. I hate her." Those words stuck in my brain. It has been 10 years since that day, but I remember it so clearly. So on the behalf of all children who have been mistreated and saved by police officers, thank you so much for what you do. If it wasn't for Officer Tom, I'd have stayed in that house till I was 18, or I would have ended myself if they didn't end me first. I'm alive today because a police officer believed me when I told him the truth. Again, thank you. Story 5. Large city police officer here, and every day there are jobs we get that we don't really care about. Most people would be surprised if we said we found stolen cars and returned them to the owner without much investigation afterwards. Most retail thefts in the city are reported and receive no further investigation. If all the store has is a short video of a dude wearing a hoodie walking out a store with $40 bucks worth of merchandise, there's not going to be much investigating. A retail theft will never be a big city priority. Vandalism, unless there is a video of it, we personally witness it, or we get a confession, we can't arrest. We just take the report and refer them elsewhere. Story 6. Most people would be surprised if we said we found stolen cars and returned them to the owner without much investigation afterwards. Doesn't surprise me. I have an aunt whose car was stolen. The perp left his driver's license and other personal property in the vehicle. The police couldn't be bothered to follow up. It's like, seriously? Open and shut case, his ID was in the dang car. Why don't you follow up on those sorts of things? It seems a much better use of resources than trying to farm money on speeding tickets and non-violent offenders. Story 7. I'd been alerted to a well-known local philanthropist turned up gone. These were the days where physician-assisted termination was illegal in most of the developed world. This man, I had known him quite well, and he had been suffering from a very serious terminal illness that was going to end him before his 40th birthday, shattering his family, especially his 2 young children. He was always donating to local charities. He gave a struggling single mother $25,000 at Christmas one year so she could pay off her debts, repair her car, buy food and presents for her children. An autopsy had determined that he had been terminated. The health authority and Department of Justice wanted us to investigate and bring the person who essentially terminated him to justice. We chalked it up that there was no way we could ever determine who it was that ended him. Years later, his wife sent our department a letter saying she gave her husband the dose to put him out of his misery. I wish I had never known. Story 8. I had to actually think about this question for a while, and it occurred to me that there hasn't been any major crimes where we, as a department, don't perform our due diligence. Even if the victim doesn't want to press charges, it will be investigated through to the end in the event the victim comes back later and changes their mind. Now, minor crimes, tons of those. Just this past weekend, a guy's car was just destroyed, 2013 Chrysler 300, pretty nice. Girl's name etched into both sides, all windows smashed. Huge rock through the sunroof. Massive, huge dent to the hood from something, all 4 tires flat. Just destroy this car. Guy tells us his ex-girlfriend did it. Ex-girlfriend is mad because he has a new girlfriend. Go over to ex-girlfriend's apartment, same apartment complex, eviction notice on the door. Ex-girlfriend claims she had no idea and doesn't know who did it. We all know she did it. Ex-girlfriend explains this guy left her and his 4 kids and ran off with the neighbor chick. Stopped paying the power, gas, rent, etc. without telling her. Comes home today to find out bills haven't been paid and they're getting evicted. She had quit her last job because he was controlling and didn't like her working. Just recently started working again. All right, I kind of feel bad, but she still did something illegal, so I'm going to investigate further. Go back to talk to the car owner again. Guy is angry we didn't arrest her and is now making me angry just being a schmuck. Tell him we're going to contact the rental office to look at the cameras. I mentioned that his kids are getting evicted. Condescending, self-centered schmuck corrects me and tells me only 3 of the 4 are his kids. That it's not his problem, those are her kids and she needs to take care of them. We had words, he threatened to complain, never did, or hasn't yet. I'm not going out of my way to investigate further. I'm sure a detective will get around to it in a few weeks. Too bad I know from previous calls the cameras at the apartment complex only retain video for about 3 to 4 days. Story 9. Sadly, in so many cases, the victim won't tell you at what location he was fired at, let alone the circumstances surrounding the firing. The first part of the investigation often involves disproving the victim's account. Guy says he was fired on 5th Street and walked to the hospital, but you have reports of sounds of gunshots on 15th Street and have video of him being dropped off in an Impala. Many times it's a case of retribution or neighborhood beefs where an accurate narrative by the victim would require the backstory that he shot the suspect's friend the week before. It's disheartening when the main initial thrust of the shooting investigation is to figure out where it happened and why, and when the victim goes AWOL and provides a bad address and phone number, so then you need to hunt him down to convince him to tell you what really happened. This all takes hours and hours away from investigating lesser crimes where the victims are honest and forthcoming. Story 10. Not verified as LEO, but I'm sharing. Had an 18-month-old terminated by his mom's boyfriend. Don't know if it was intentional or accidental. Mom finds the kid after she gets off work. He's staged in his crib all tucked in but has been gone for several hours now. Suspect had wounded his wrists, wrote an apology on the bathroom wall. I'm sorry, Tammy. The suspect had laid down in bed to wait. It took too long, so the suspect got up and left the house. I didn't care to find him to save him from his attempt. I guess the crime was solved and we knew who had done it. I would have had to try to save the guy so he could go to court, but his passing was easier and seemed more just. It's part of the job, though, so we were going to look. We got a hit immediately. The suspect had driven into a neighboring county out in the county. He drove into a concrete barrier. They estimated he was going about 80 miles per hour. He wasn't belted in and was ejected through the windshield. The vehicle rolled and landed. This was some years ago. The guys on the case all got Grand Cordon awards. I wear the ribbon on my Class A's. We didn't do anything, though, really. It's just a reminder of how messed up it gets. I still remember the kid's full name, his mother's name, and that is the time I didn't want to find a suspect. Story 11. Ex-cop, NSW, Australia, 7 years. I really never wanted to find the answer to 2 particular terminations in my area. 2 known offenders were terminated in the space of 8 weeks. One was a kiddie fiddler, the other used to spike women. The 2 issues were unrelated. Only one of the alleged offenders was caught. He was released after a week due to lack of evidence. I know it's bad to wish passing on people, but these 2 blokes were just rancid. As a cop, it was my job to find the offenders, but as a human, I had no interest in solving the issue at all. Luckily, I was never in charge of the investigations. Story 12. I heard once that most thieves will rely on the fact that the general populace believes that somebody else will intervene. From shoplifting to taking people away, most people who witness a crime will hope somebody else saw it and did something. Personally, I rely on thieves' paranoia that I'm the dude who did. I saw it, I said something, and I will remember. So go ahead and make a scene, dude. I might lose my job, but you stand a chance at losing a little bit more. I'll have plenty of other jobs, but you will only have so many chances. That being said, I once helped these store detectives stop a guy who, once they got him to the back office, had stolen 2 quarts of motor oil and some baby formula. He broke down crying, saying he had a job interview the following Monday and his baby was hungry, and he had to make that interview come hell or high water. We gathered in a room without him and discussed it, decided to let him go. I think my supervisor even bought the stuff for him. Or maybe I just want to remember it that way. Story 13. Had a guy report he had been taken and spiked against his will. He had managed to escape and had run across town to evade his captors. I was able to rendezvous with him and bring him back to the station. He told me this grand story about being taken across a county and by people he thought were his family, no less. When I asked him their names and where he had been held, he got all sheepish and said he didn't want to make enemies and just wanted to go home. I started driving him towards his home and dropped him off at a gas station just outside my jurisdiction. Sorry, neighboring detachment, he's your problem now. And the officer's thought process, is this guy a victim, a liar, or just really, really bad at family gatherings? Yeah, someone else can figure it out. Story 14. The case of why I got fired. A coworker of mine had done something wrong, nothing horrible, but a mere stupid mistake. I was there at the time, but I didn't care. I told him to pay better attention next time and be done with it. But my superiors did not agree. They wanted him gone, so they ordered me to make the facts worse than they actually were. I was supposed to lie for them. I refused on the spot, and they told me that it could harm my career. I said I don't care, and that officers from the Royal Army should not behave in such a way. And before I knew it, they found someone else that lied about what he did and about what I did. As we had no way of disproving what they told people we did, we both got fired without honors. It was done publicly, stripped of rank and honors. We both laughed and walked away, said this is not the kind of people we wanted to work for in the first place, and that they could go screw themselves. We were both military police officers. I got a new job shortly after that. I made almost twice the money I did there. Best decision of my life. And I have no regrets for not putting in a false statement. So I decided not to press charges because we had no way of proving we did not do the things they claimed we did. Story 15. One lazy Sunday afternoon on duty in North London, I received a call about a male acting erratically in a residential house. As soon as I entered, having been let in by his girlfriend, the man became aggressive. He charged at me, and I was forced to use my truncheon to subdue him. As he lay on the floor, I thought, I know you. He was a member of a well-known 70s English pop group. Well, this is a first, I thought. He then got up and tried to subdue me, and for several minutes, it seemed like a lifetime, I was fighting for my life. Luckily, backup arrived in time and he was quickly surrounded by police officers. The London ambulance service arrived and a medical opinion was given. He's completely mad. Someone had the bright idea to restrain him in a spinal restraint. He was placed in the restraint, and seeing him burst the leather straps was quite disconcerting. So we all jumped on him again. It ended all right in the end. It was a very, very intense trip that had gone wrong. He was very apologetic when he came out of it. Story 16. Working at a monitoring company, police department in Houston is the worst to deal with. The dispatcher sounds like they hate their job and don't take info correctly. Also rude and take their time when a crime has taken place. California is a terrible place for us because they have the weirdest laws for the homeless and how an affidavit works out. It's never good for the monitoring company, never good for the business the crime is happening in. Other states comply when we say what we do and that crime is happening live. They stay on the phone and even ask for an email to send raw footage to. Not Cali, not Houston. For example, Cali today did not let us dispatch out to a property where an individual was on the floor in front of a shopping center who passed out intoxicated. The dude had bottles around him and was knocked out, not clear if asleep or gone. They stated they couldn't dispatch out to the property because they can't disrupt people's sleep, even if they're out on private property intoxicated off their back. We reviewed it and the guy appeared to be alive, just asleep. In Houston, when my position was to dispatch PD out to a property, I've had multiple dispatchers stall me, take unnecessary information about what's taking place, and have an attitude when I try to give them more information about the individual's whereabouts and clothing. I was hung up on after attempting to gather information about the ETA of the officers, and when I called dispatch back trying to figure out the operator's name or number, I was hung up on again. Just the main things I've noticed since I have to work with police, dispatch, and detectives since I saw the crime. I've worked at the monitoring company for about a year and a half. Story 17. EMT here. I once responded to a call where a man and his preteen daughter were fired at randomly in their own yard. The daughter had a minor wound, but the man had a serious wound. He was, surprisingly, still alive, unconscious but still breathing by himself and still had a pulse. We futilely did everything we could as far as pre-hospital medicine goes, but we got him to the hospital alive. My colleague later brought him from the hospital. We brought him to the trauma center about 30 minutes away, still alive but still super unstable. I'd like to think he lived, but that's pretty unlikely, and even if he did, he probably wouldn't really be alive. Story 18. My uncle was a cop in Florida in the 90s. They were finding kids who passed away on the interstate for maybe 5 years or so before my uncle retired. No suspects, kids taken within 100 miles or so. At the peak, it'd be one thing every 2 months, but usually they found 2 a year, never been solved. After he retired, evidence photos in some of those cases got destroyed in a flood. But for like 10 years after my uncle's retirement, his department would call him when a similar case came through so he'd reproduce the details for them. He stopped responding to those requests at some point and said he just wants to live the rest of his life without seeing another one. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 19. I'm not a cop, but I do investigate and enforce against environmental violations. 99% of the time, I deal with companies who have environmental staff or attorneys that can address issues and work with us to resolve them. They have deep pockets and they know they're screwed up. Every once in a while, though, I get something a little different. A few months back, I got a call from one of our actual cops who had gotten a complaint. Turns out a couple of Amish guys had decided to open a sawmill. They got hold of an old steel tank, had someone weld a chimney on it, and torch a hole for a door. They used it to burn all of their wood scraps, branches, bark, waste pieces, etc. Unfortunately, the property they were doing it on was across the street from some schmuck who complained, so I had to investigate. I dragged my feet for a while because I knew that once I found a violation operating an unpermitted emission source, I would have to act on it, but I can't sit on things forever, so I had to go out there. We explained everything to the gentlemen who were confused but very nice about the whole situation. Unfortunately, our legal folks were fine with waiving any penalties so long as they stopped doing what they were doing. I really hope it didn't put those guys out of business. Yeah, they were probably just trying to make, maple, smoked, everything. If you smelled bacon, that was just a happy accident. Story 20. Other side of the coin, my house was robbed of something like $5,000 worth of stuff while I was at work. I lived in a crappy part of town, so cops patrolled on foot, substation literally at the other end of my block. Even 2 houses down from a traffic camera, no one saw anything. The detectives took a list of everything, said they would look into it, but they never even came to my house. I had to go to them. I even found fingerprints on the outside of the window they climbed into to unlock my front door that they never came out to collect or check out. I didn't have renter's insurance and I got screwed for the whole thing. I don't think I'll even call the cops if I ever need them again. Story 21. All right, detective now, but this happened when I was on patrol several years ago. Got a call to check the welfare of a guy whose neighbor hadn't seen him in a couple of years. Why it took so long to report, but it was out in a rural area. Anyway, we rolled up and the windows were black with mold and flies, cars parked in the garage, no signs of forced entry. Reach the door and find said guy wrapped up in a phone cord outside a toppled chair in his dining room. The smell of him mingled with the inches of stagnant water in his basement from burst pipes and all the flies and mold. I'll never forget it. We also found 2 bags of groceries neatly packed on the floor in his kitchen. House was very tidy as well. No witnesses estranged from his family. Medical records indicated he had a heart condition. My theory is he was having a heart attack and tried to call 911 but never got to make the call. Perhaps the creepiest part? His mailbox was overflowing with past due bills and canceled utility notices. The last one was a couple of months old, and it still took someone that long to call. Story 22. I lived in a small town somewhat recently, and the police blotter online made a post saying that the police were called because a woman couldn't find her one baking sheet and was convinced someone broke in and stole it, and that was the only item that was missing. A few days later, police were called elsewhere in town because overnight someone threw slices of cheese on a car windshield. My favorite one was someone calling the cops because they heard a person singing Old Man River loudly in the attic. I still have no idea how that ended. I wanted to follow up so badly. God forbid people report something that was an actual emergency. Story 23. An internal affairs case at a prison I used to work at, though I wasn't with the Internal Affairs Bureau or the state's investigator's office. Holy crap, this was a fiasco. In the segregation unit of the prison, there was a very eccentric sergeant who worked out constantly, and he liked to sit in front of cells and talk to the inmates about life for hours on end. He routinely went to the gym with one of the nurses who gave inmates their nightly medications. One evening, one of the inmates is escorted out for his insulin. The inmate makes an offhand comment to the nurse, "Are you going to Gold's Gym in any town after work?" The escorting officer reports it as personal information of that nature is a security risk. The sergeant is instantly put into speculation, and the nurse reports that they are gym partners. There are anonymous reports that he is having unscheduled personal conversations with inmates in the cell house. People will not go near him. Heck no, you want to tell the kitty fielders what school my kids go to while you're at it? A few weeks later, there's an allegation that the nurse was having an affair with the exact inmate who made the gym comment. But so far, unfounded, so they ensure that none of the 3 people are in the same part of the prison while they investigate further. They need to rule out that this also isn't some form of retaliation on the sergeant's behalf. During the investigation, an oddity is discovered. The inmate lived several hours away but was receiving Western Union money orders to his account from a relatively close gas station. They acquire surveillance footage, and sure enough, it's the nurse. She's been putting money on the inmate's books for several months under a false identity. During the routine pill line for the general population, the nurse will be locked in a small, secure room with a pass-through for medications. It was revealed that she would hide in the corner and fiddle when he came to the door. He intentionally violated prison directives to be sent to segregation because she told him of an upcoming change in the nursing rotation. They set the sergeant up as a red herring. She eventually resigned, and I'm unsure what legal action was taken. The inmate was moved to a different facility. Story 24. I'm a 911 dispatcher, but one of the strangest calls I've ever encountered was spooky. So I was working the TAC radio one night in Broward County at around 3 a.m. This was about 5 years ago. An 18-wheeler slammed directly into a box truck as it was getting off an exit on the highway. Now, this particular stretch of highway was very barren. The box truck damn near exploded and the 18-wheeler chopped it in half. 3 people were trapped inside of the burning truck. According to the people in the truck, they were rescued by a man, and that man sat them all neatly on the side of the road and waited there with them until units arrived. Now, we sent the world to this accident being that it was a vehicle fire with entrapment. Florida Highway came as well as about 3 different jurisdictions of police and fire. By the time they got there, it must have been over 100 units. A firefighter grabbed hold of the arm of the rescuer of the people to check him out, but when that firefighter turned around, the guy was gone. He vanished. We even had half of the units searching for him in case he was injured. No one ever saw that man ever again. Every time I tell this story, I get a mediocre reaction, but I'm telling you, man, it was spooky, like the guy was a ghost or a spirit or something who rescued those people. Story 25. Not a detective, but had to share this story. When I was around 15, I'd ride the bus to school. There was this 10-year-old girl who'd always sit across from me and talk on the way into school. She was just one of the people you felt protective of. She never seemed troubled or in danger. She just kind of brought the big brother out in me. So later on that year, we hear that her father had ended her mother and then ended it all. The whole town just went into shock. We were a fairly small community and this just never happened. And then the big reveal came. The girl was upset with her parents, ended them both, and set it up to look like the dad did it. That shocked me right to the core. No evidence of her being neglected. I sat right next to evil personified all the months and thought she needed protection. Story 26. Not a detective, but something did happen in my apartment society. It's a gated society with 5 buildings, and one morning there was a huge crowd in front of one of the buildings. Turns out that a woman had jumped from the 5th floor into the elevator lobby area around 3 in the morning or so. One of my friends' dad was first on the scene as he said that he heard a loud boom sound around that time and went to check it out. And here's where things get shady. The woman was living with her husband and mother-in-law, and when people went to ask the mother-in-law whether she could confirm that it was her son's wife, she looked over the edge of the 5th floor at the one below and said, "Oh yes, that's her," in a completely neutral tone. Local police department got suspicious and checked the lobby cameras for any clues. It turned out that the husband had tried to subdue her, rope marks on the neck, and then took her to the 9th floor and dropped her. The piece de resistance, the camera, showed her slippers dropping a whole 5 minutes after it hit the ground. The husband threw her off and skipped town, and a background check revealed that this was his second marriage, and there were rumors that he and his mother ended his first wife. For a solid month or so, I had to escort residents to their homes because people in that building were terrified of what could happen. Story 27. Not a detective, but I contacted my detective to run the incident by him. I was a field training officer training a new deputy for my department. We received a call about a lady who was stranded at a gas station, essentially a check well-being call. My trainee and I responded to the gas station and made contact with the lady. She stated she was staying at a hotel nearby and did not need any assistance. My trainee spoke with her more and she mentioned the government was after her and kind of went off a weird conversation that didn't make a whole lot of sense. On her car, she had a bunch of missing posters and flyers of a man that went missing from California, the state. I asked about the missing man and she told me it was her husband and he went missing years ago and she was on a mission to find him. She mentioned she found parts in her home in California and my trainee asked if that had been investigated, which she stated it had been by a local department. Out of curiosity, I asked her what kind of parts she found in her home and she stated toes. And that sparked my interest and I asked her where they are now. The woman looks me in the eye and states, "They're in my purse. Would you like to see them?" In complete shock, I told her, of course, and I'm thinking to myself, there is no way this woman has parts in her purse. Surely enough, we walked over to her car. She reached in and grabbed the medicine bottle. I asked her where she got them, and she said she found them in her house in California. She advised she had no idea who they were. It should be noted the bottle had medical tape around the cap indicating it was sealed. And long story short, I made contact with my investigator, and we determined it was not illegal to possess them in the way she had them. Of course, I'm thinking she ended her ex and kept them for some reason. I decided to look into it further and it was determined the missing ex left her for another woman and it was fine. The woman's sister stated the woman took a bunch of meds for many different issues and eventually quit taking them, hence the abnormal behavior. I never did figure out whose toes they were and eventually sent her on her way. We determined they were likely removed by a medical professional in a hospital and someone decided to keep them. Story 28. Not a story from a detective, but I figured it'd still be relevant. I remember speaking to a county prosecutor from my mock trial program, and he told me about one of his most disturbing cases. A man had cheated on his wife with a dancer from Canada, and when his wife came home, she saw her husband cheating on her. He proceeded to end her and left her body in the master bedroom. I'm not sure what happened to the dancer. The man proceeded to go downstairs where his 2 children slept soundly and doused the hallways with gasoline. He lit the hallway, went back upstairs, and just waited. After his house erupted with smoke, he jumped off the balcony and was quickly arrested. While the story didn't come from a detective, he told me about how officers at the scene took photos at the scene. I can't imagine how traumatizing it even was for the detectives and CSI to piece together the fact that he ended his 2 children and his wife. The man proceeded to end himself in jail before he was to go on trial. Story 29. I've worked as a forensic expert in computer science for several years. During my career, I've investigated many strange cases. For example, I received several hard drives from a man charged with sharing disturbing content. Instead of the expected material, the drives contained over 1 million photos and videos, about 2 terabytes of data, all featuring My Little Pony, yeah, the cartoon. I was given a mobile phone to analyze from another man, also charged with sharing disturbing content. He used his phone to record videos of himself chasing and then doing disturbing stuff. I believe that was one of my earliest cases. A woman lost approximately 50,000 euros to an internet scammer. She had been chatting with a man impersonating a US soldier who told her he was in love with her and needed 1,000 euros to come see her. She sent him the money and he continued the scam, promising to buy a house for them to live in. She then sent him another 50,000 euros and he disappeared. She was shocked and reported it to the police. They took her phone and PC for further investigation. A few years ago, the police seized around 20 MacBooks from a small company to investigate fraud and fake invoices. Unfortunately, they only took the monitors, mistaking every stationary Mac for an iMac. When they returned a few days later to seize the actual computers, none were left and the investigation was discontinued. Story 30. No longer a detective, so I feel like I can share. There was a really wealthy family in town. The grandfather was an author or a writer of some sort. He had built a legacy over the years. All of his family members were taking advantage of his wealth. He had a few kids, and one daughter who worked in real estate. Her dad never trusted the guy she married. The middle child had passed away a few years prior, but his wife was still connected to the family. She was taking money from the grandfather and acting like it was for her daughter's college tuition. The youngest son worked for the publishing company he created. The whole family was just a mess, very dysfunctional, only really involved with the grandfather because of his money. As we learned more about the case, this became really obvious. Anyway, one night after a family gathering, the grandfather just ended himself. We were called to the scene to analyze the scene. We ended up interviewing all of the family members. Took us a couple days. It was a textbook case. The grandfather was getting up in age and didn't want to deal with the issues he was facing anymore. Then, out of nowhere, right when we are about to close the case, a random private investigator shows up. He ended up throwing everything we had already determined out the window. He hijacked the entire case. I've never been kicked off of a case before, especially from someone outside of the local office. Yep, there we were, being told what to do by a private investigator. Long story short, he found out the grandson had actually planned the old man's termination. Things didn't go as planned, but after about 90 minutes, we finally were able to figure out what happened. I'll never forget the case. I'll replay it over and over again all the time. I actually just replayed it the other night. Story 31. My mom is also not an actual detective, but she might as well be. She's found multiple men who disappeared to avoid paying child support. One man, a cruel user, keeps trying to disappear and she or his former partner keeps finding him. She found the former son-in-law of a neighbor from his Facebook photos, which included a photo of his car and license plate. She found someone's lost retirement benefits. Long story. She also found the arrest photo of a guy I just started dating and showed it to me. Thanks, Mom. It was for grass possession and I already knew about it, so I didn't care that much. She used to regularly check up on her kids' dates, and she still regularly checks up on people, especially family members, who she's fallen out of contact with. She usually doesn't do anything with that info. She just collects it. Story 32. Not a cop, but I went on a hunting trip with the big city cop one time, and he told the story of the first case he ever worked. A man gets harmed with a screwdriver, pulls it out, makes a statement to the cop. They pick up the suspect. I can't remember if she was a roommate or knew his roommate. She doesn't know he's gone and tells the cops how she harmed him in the neck because he wouldn't share his watermelon with her. Case closed. Story 33. My uncle was a detective about 35 years ago. He was investigating a string of break-ins and discovered that a user had burrowed a hole into the foundation of an apartment building into some space between footers. He was living there in a nest made from newspapers and random trash. Yes, like that X-Files episode. When two officers went to pull the guy out, the user lashed out and started biting. My uncle described the sound as biting into a cold carrot. When they finally got the guy out, he broke free and started climbing upstairs. He was still plus 100 strength on the ultra buffing powers of substance, so he proceeded to pick up and throw one officer and my uncle over the stairwell. They eventually caught the guy. My uncle sustained a major injury and went on permanent disability, though. Story 34. Obligatory, not a detective, but I had a few weird army things in my time. At the end of a major field exercise, it's customary to lock up the ammo and have a little party before everyone departs back to their home units and loved ones. Two guys disappeared that night and were AWOL from their unit's roll call the next morning to get on the buses and go home. While the army was scouring the camp for these guys, one of the dude's dads used some Find My iPhone app and found his son face down in the middle of a field beside some train tracks almost an hour's drive away from the training area, alive but unconscious. Later, we find that the second dude was in the custody of municipal police from a city like 3 hours away. Apparently, these dudes decided that they wanted out of the training area right now, jumped a fence, and train hoboed on a nearby track. Partway through their train hobo trip, one dude decides he doesn't want to be on the train anymore and tries the old tuck and roll while the train is in motion. Second dude stayed on until the next stop in the city where he's immediately arrested because the conductor saw them get on. Still a better outcome than the dude who ended up in a coma for weeks. Normal people don't join the army. Story 35. I was a store detective, loss prevention in my younger years. I covered a number of large outlet clothing stores in a region of my country. One particular Christmas period, we were having a serious problem with an organized gang of shoplifters. They were targeting several stores, taking thousands of dollars at a time. For reasons which later became clear, they were always one step ahead. They would always target stores which I had just left or was not at that particular day. One day my ride broke down and I borrowed my cousin's car to get to work. Within 2 hours of my shift, I managed to apprehend the gang and recover a trolley with $2,500 of clothing. In an interview with the ringleader, he admitted his partner worked at one of the stores and she had tipped him off regarding me, my vehicle, and license plate. Therefore, they had been looking for my car outside before targeting stores. The female accomplice was sacked and the other three went to court. Story 36. Does private detective count? Because my team and I were after a guy who was suspected to be scamming for workers' comp. Almost all of our cases were for years, except this guy was a fairly well-respected super handicap archery champion. We watched him at a competition, taking forever to try and knock his arrow with a lame hand from a stroke from his wheelchair, accident at work, can't walk. Then he got home, walked around his handicap van, got his wheelchair out of the van with the lift, and pushed the thing to his house with both hands. Some people suck. I mean, we knew something was not right, but nobody expected that. At one time, I had to verify the residency of a certain Middle Eastern dictator's former secretary a few years before he was executed. I actually only found her house, but never saw her. He had tons of secretaries over the years, so there was no suspicion of anything weird going on. Just something that passed over my desk one day and thought it was slightly worth mentioning. Story 37. Mystery crapper. About 25 years ago, I worked in a large upscale hotel. Someone was going up to the various floors and taking a crap next to the ice machine. This would happen regularly. After some time, my coworker confessed to me that it was him all along. He quit his job shortly after this. The housekeeping department was relieved. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.